Our notes today are about Chapter 10 and focus on the topic of campaigns and elections. Before we really get into campaigns and elections, though, we should talk a little bit about the way that voting rights have expanded in the United States. Obviously, the whole purpose of a campaign and an election is to try to get as many votes as possible. So we want to take a few minutes to talk about who votes, who is eligible to vote. And you can see from the picture, some different groups that have gained the right to vote over time. African Americans, women, 18 to 20-year-olds. Believe it or not, when the Constitution was approved, only 6% of Americans were actually allowed to vote. And this was primarily white males over the age of 21 who owned a lot of property. So wealthy white male landowners. And it was only about 6%. So democracy is one of our ideals, but early on, democracy wasn't very widespread. The history of our country shows the growth of the right to vote. Between the 1820s and 1850, every state gradually eliminated the property requirement. And so now you didn't have to be a wealthy landowner. Now it was pretty much all white men over the age of 21. So still fairly restrictive, but not as restrictive as before. After the Civil War, African American men got the right to vote. The 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. But you guys probably already have a sense of how a lot of states, particularly those in the South, put up a lot of barriers or obstacles to prevent African Americans from voting. This included things like poll taxes, or the infamous literacy test, which asked just crazy questions that are difficult for anyone to answer, much less somebody who has been denied an education, like a lot of African Americans were. So a couple of examples from the state of Louisiana's literacy test. Circle the first letter of the alphabet in this line. I'm a reasonably educated person, and I'm not sure which letter I'm supposed to circle. The first letter, does that mean the first A, because A is the first letter of the alphabet? Or does it mean the C in circle? It's very confusing, and it's intentionally confusing so that people would get it wrong and states could keep them from voting. Here's another example. Divide a vertical line in two equal parts by bisecting it with a curved horizontal line that is only straight at its spot bisection of the vertical. Yeah. Don't know how to do that. By 1920, women gained the right to vote when the 19th Amendment was passed. By 1924, Native Americans were given citizenship and gained voting rights. By 1965, the Voting Rights Act comes along and eliminates those obstacles that had been preventing African Americans from being able to vote, those poll taxes and literacy tests and things like that. In 1971, the voting age was lowered to 18. That allowed people from the age of 18 to 20 to vote. Today, it is easier than ever and more convenient than ever to vote and to get registered to vote, right? A lot of states are using electronic push machine, touch machines like the picture here. It's incredibly easy to get yourself registered. It's incredibly easy to vote. But there's still a lot of people who don't do it. for a lot of reasons. You know, they work all day and they can't get to the voting booths, or they're just apathetic and they just don't care, or they just feel hopeless, like their vote doesn't matter, or they're sick, or they're elderly and have trouble getting around. So that leads to the question of, well, what can we do about it? What can we do in the future? How can we make voting easier and more convenient? Some people raise the question, should voting be mandatory? Should we make it a requirement to vote? And these are difficult questions, and there's a lot of debate over them. So they're not going to go away anytime soon. But we need to understand who can vote and some reasons why people don't, because the main topic of the chapter here is elections. And we're focusing specifically on the biggest election, presidential elections. So the first thing to understand about running for president is that you have to actually get nominated to run for president. Each party, the Republicans, the Democrats, the third parties, has a process for picking its nominee. For each party, every state is going to select delegates to go to the party's national convention. And the national convention is in charge of formally choosing the party's nominee for president. Most states pick their delegates by running primary elections. The primary election is an election where candidates are running against other people from the same party to be nominated for office. To gain the support that you'll need to win the nomination, you need a lot of help. You need a big organization with lots of workers, people to go out and talk to voters, to man the phones, to run websites, to run the offices, all kinds of support that you need. You also need a strategy. What issues are you going to talk about? What's your position on all of those issues? And you need a lot of money. At the national convention, the political party is going to choose nominees for president and vice president, and they're going to put together a party platform, which is what the party stands for. It's what the party believes in. So the next slide shows a short video clip, and I hope it will work, that gives you a sense of kind of what the atmosphere and the mood is like at national conventions.
Mr. Chairman and delegates, I accept your nomination for President of the United States. I do so with humility, deeply moved by the trust you've placed in me. It's a great honor. It's an even greater responsibility. And tonight I'm asking you to join me to walk together to a better future. And by my side, I've chosen a man with a big heart from a small town. He represents the best of America, a man who will always make us very proud. My friend and America's next Vice President, Paul Ryan.
So a little clip there. You see the cheering delegates. The eventual nominee, who in this case in 2012 was Mitt Romney for the Republicans, gives a speech accepting formally the nomination. He picks somebody to be vice presidential nominee, and the Democrats are going to be doing the same thing. So the next step is actually getting elected, right? And once you've got it down to two people, the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, they're going to campaign against each other. And they're going to focus primarily on the states that they think they can win, plus a small number of what are called battleground states. And those states are sort of toss-up states. They could go either way. Virginia is actually has turned into one of those battleground states. Could go Republican, could go Democrat. Florida, Ohio, Nevada are some others. Now, to get elected in the what is called the general election, the Republican versus the Democrat, you really have to broaden your appeal. You have to open up your appeal to a wide range of voters. And politicians call this moving to the middle. And that's usually not how you get nominated. You get nominated by firing up your party's base, the strong Republicans or the strong Democrats. But once you are running in the general election, you need to appeal to a bigger number of people. And so candidates will often sort of tweak their message to appeal to people who are more moderate or more independent voters. The candidate who gets the most votes in the Electoral College wins the election. And so when you see, on election night every 4 years, the map of the U.S. with some states in red and some states in blue, that is the map of the Electoral College. And this is one from 2012 that showed, Barack Obama comfortably winning the electoral vote. That didn't even include the state of Florida, which he ended up winning as well. And so you get the most votes in the Electoral College, you win the election. At each stage of the campaign, through the primary campaign, the general election campaign, you're going to have a lot of money. It's very, very expensive to run a campaign. And that's going to pay for TV ads, radio ads, a web page, all of your campaign staff, all of the offices that you have spread out all over the country, your transportation, all of the bumper stickers and the signs that go into people's yards, and of course running campaign events, renting out gymnasiums and arenas to give speeches. It takes a lot of money to run for office, especially for president, which leads to what a lot of people see as a major problem about campaign finance. As it gets more and more expensive, it gets harder and harder for people to run for president if they don't have a lot of money or if they don't have a lot of rich buddies or ways to raise all of that money. So that might keep some people who would be good candidates from running. And when you have people who donate a lot of money to a candidate, they sometimes will expect to have a lot of influence on the candidate as well. So last thing we'll talk about is who actually votes. What is sort of the typical voters? Well, the groups of people who vote the most are typically the people who get the most attention from the candidates, right? If you're a candidate, that makes sense. You're going to focus your time, effort, and attention on the people that are actually likely to go out and vote. So some basic characteristics. The average voter is usually 30 and over. People under 30 tend to not vote in as high a numbers. The elderly tend to not vote in as high a numbers either. The average voter is college educated. So people with a high school education or less tend to not vote in higher numbers. And lastly, income. Middle class and wealthy tend to be the groups that vote the most. Folks who are lower class, living in poverty, tend to not vote. And so, unfortunately, a lot of candidates really focus their messages on those people that vote, and they're not paying as much attention to the people who don't vote.